Welcome to the Antlered Crown podcast, where we discuss brews, witchcraft, spirituality, and more.
We hope through conversation we can continue to support and learn something new from ourselves and each other.
Today, we're drinking peppermint tea.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then we're going to talk to an expert on religious trauma.
So come on in.
Beyond the weather and the marsh, there is a whisper in the dark through the tides of disarray, where a wisdom knows the way. If you listen very still, there are answers to the ills, where the ancient pulses deep of the memories you keep.
Welcome to the Antlered Crown podcast. I'm Elwin, and I'm a witch.
And I'm Amanda, the Antlered Queen on TikTok, and I am so excited to learn more on today's topic, religious trauma.
Please welcome our guest, Emily Hedrick, a health and wellness coach for trauma recovery and trauma support specialist.
Welcome.
Hello.
So glad to be here.
Yeah. So would you say you're an expert, or how do you feel about that title?
I have feelings about that title. I'm suspicious of a lot of people that claim expert status in pretty much anything, but especially religious trauma. So I would say I have personal experience with it.
Yes.
I talk to a lot of people who have it. And it's really hard to be an official expert if you go academia-wise at this point, because we're still figuring out religious trauma exists in those circles.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. Well, I think that's a great segue into our first question, which is, how did you come to be in this line of work?
Yes. Okay. So there are so many different pathways. Like I could start when I was 5, I could start when I was 29, I could start when I was 17. But I guess what I'll say is I started being in this line of work, being interested specifically in religious trauma, because I experienced it myself from some religiously abusive situations that I survived growing up, but particularly that came to a head when I was 17. And it was a very strange experience being hurt by things that weren't physical, except that it's complicated because they are in a way. And also getting people to understand the severity and realness of my experiences was very, very difficult. And I didn't have the term religious trauma then. And so the way I dealt with it at the time was the way a lot of trauma survivors try to achieve safety, which was I attempted to control my environment. So I became a pastor. And the hope was, well, if I'm the pastor, I know what's coming. I can shape the theology. I can try to be a healing force in this toxic environment.
Right.
And that obviously backfired. So though I will say the path to getting there was really helpful and healing in many ways.
Right.
But what I have since learned as I've studied trauma itself more is you can't heal from trauma when you're still in danger and when you're still in the environment that causes the harm. And so for a lot of people, it's not really possible to do that in a religious setting. And so not only for me, as far as I was not blatantly saying, I'm a pastor that works with religious trauma, I was more like, people have been hurt in church and we're going to make it healthier. But many people in those settings, depending on what dynamics are at play, are not interested in healing from it. They're too busy surviving it.
Okay.
So, so anyway, from there, I ended up learning more about religious trauma, learning more about trauma in general, and learning more about coaching and starting my own practice with that.
Absolutely.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, actually, a question on that. I like what you said about the being free from danger means that you can heal. You're not able to heal when you are still in danger, which I feel something that a lot of people are struggling with in forms of religious trauma or any trauma, really, in that sense.
Yeah.
what I noticed, especially about religion in religious trauma, is it's solely based in fear, and it's almost a means of controlling fear. It's like
Mhm.
fear the smaller things, so then you don't have to fear the big things. In a sense, it's
Mm.
this moment. I've spoken to a few people who've come away from religious backgrounds, and they talk about the moment they actually look at the idea that maybe there is nothing there, this thing that originally that they instilled a fear.
Yeah.
Don't
Mhm.
look at that. Don't look at that, this massive thing. And once they look at it, the fear is taken away, in a sense. They
Mm.
realize that, so what? If this is the case, if this is the case that there is nothing there is no greater plan, it means
Mm-hmm.
that I'm in control. It means that I get a say in what I do now, and what I do now is even more important.
Mm.
Which is it's a really, it seems like such a simple thing, but when you have other people throwing in their own perceptions and what they want other people to believe,
Mm.
it
Mhm.
creates such a mess just to get to that idea.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
It's I think about it quite a lot, actually. It takes a lot of time up sometimes because it's
Yeah. And I mean, there's all kinds of questions I have about the nature of religion and
Mm.
how it came to be so toxic in our current context.
Yeah.
And I should also clarify, at least for myself, I've studied at least the Christian religion for a good 7 years of official schooling, and I have a bit more of a nuanced perspective than to say it's all evil, get rid of it.
Right.
yeah.
It's complicated, and
Mm-hmm.
and part of that too, I think religion has in many ways been a tool that humans have used to deal with other forms of trauma,
Right.
Mm,
and it's part of what makes it so powerful and helpful when it's healthy,
mm,
but
Mm-hmm.
also what makes it so deeply twisted. And like, religious trauma is so much more than my hobby hurt me. It's my
Mm.
entire life
mm.
was intertwined with this
Mhm.
toxic stuff that now I have to disentangle.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah. What are the physical effects of religious trauma, or the mental effects as well, or how does it stem from that, if you know what I mean, from going from mental to physical or vice versa?
Yeah. So there are a few different ways that things can manifest, but I think the a nice way to answer this is to consider people that have lived their entire lives in hypervigilance.
Mm,
And so when religion is used to control and fear is used to create that control,
mm,
then religion can put us in a state of being afraid of everyday life because I have to control every minute little action to make sure that I'm living the right path.
yeah,
And that has effects on our bodies because our bodies are not meant to be in a fight, flight, threat response all the time.
yeah,
It can be very helpful for little bits of a time, but and even then, it's debatable these days.
mm,
But um, ultimately, two things happen. First, being in a threat response for longer than about 30 seconds it wears on the body over time, and that
mm,
process is defined as allostatic load.
Mm.
Um, in the trauma world, that ultimately it's if you are in crisis mode using certain systems that are kind of take a lot of energy and take a lot of resources,
yeah,
that eventually you'll deplete and it'll start pulling from other things that aren't designed to be working that way. But
right,
the other thing is that we can't have our healing system on at the same time as the crisis system.
mm,
And so that means that not only are we being depleted, but we are also not getting a chance to recover. And so that can look like
yeah,
physically um, chronic pain,
right,
indigestion, headaches, migraines, just a constant sense of being on edge, and
mm,
how that can manifest physically, not being able to focus, brain fog, exhaustion, fatigue.
Mm-hmm.
mm,
And that's beside the other kinds of symptoms that can come up for people related to flashbacks and avoidance and other things like that that come with just perceiving threats everywhere.
Yes. Okay. That's both of us, we haven't really experienced religious trauma in our upbringing. We have both experienced trauma in other ways, but not religious. But
fun.
those things that you mentioned are things that I can relate to in my part in a long time ago. The things that once I found myself out of the city, I lived in the country, I deflated completely. I was plagued with nightmares for about a year, but it was also this sense of, I remember my aunt bringing me food, and she was like, you slept for almost 2 days when I got there. She's like, you slept for 2 days. And she woke me up and gave me food, and I didn't eat it. And she said, she hadn't seen me in years since I was a small child. And she was quite shocked at who the person I was. It was very different. And I remember mentioning it, but she said, why haven't you eaten your food? And I remember telling her years later the reason why, but I didn't tell her then, was I sounds really silly, but I was worried that she may have put something in my food. Simply because people didn't cook me food growing up. People didn't give me things. I was like, this is, what do you want? What is, but it's that it took me a long time to trust, and also to, as you said, that flight or fright response, constantly on edge, constantly aware of what's the catch, where am I, is there danger. It took me so long, because I was in it for so long, to switch that off and just to trust where I was. It's exhausting.
Right.
It's so, and then all of a sudden it was like someone just pulled the pin, and I completely went and just, I had no energy. Like, it was very strange experience.
I do wonder, I guess this is a separate question, but I do wonder, is there an actual diagnosis is it called DSMR yet for religious trauma?
No, there is not. And there also isn't for what I would say Ellen was just describing, like complex trauma. They tried to get it in, but politics.
Oh, really?
Okay. Bessel van der Kolk talks a little bit about it in The Body Keeps the Score. But as far as religious trauma goes, no, it's not in the DSM. And that makes things a little difficult for a variety of reasons. The first is, you can't go to your therapist and say, I have religious trauma, and expect them to understand.
Right.
And there are a few things that make that even more difficult, in that a lot of times therapists are taught to send people, if they have spiritual issues, to their clergy. Ooh. And there are some really great clergy out there. I was one.
Yeah.
And also there are some really not great clergy out there. I've experienced some of them myself. And so that can make things complicated. In addition to that, it's really just not in the curriculum. So if anybody hasn't come out of a toxic religious environment, they may not know what exactly is going on with their people or what to look for. So I've had a lot of clients tell me it's much easier to work with me, because they can say a phrase and communicate what would have taken 2 hours with a therapist that just doesn't have the background.
Right.
So I'm really hoping for change. That's not what I'm focusing on myself, but I'm really excited for the people that want to do that work. I will say that complex trauma did get into the ICD-11, which is an international diagnostic tool. And one of the things underneath that mentions religion potentially being a cause of it. So we're getting there, but it's not in the United States used one.
No.
So.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
It is interesting. I know I personally work recently, just for the last year, in grief, and there's a lot of interesting stigmas along with grief therapy too that are not very relevant anymore. Like the 5 stages of grief aren't something that's a thing. I don't know who came up with that, but that's not really, you can experience grief anytime. It can hit you years down the line. There's not like an anger and a sadness and all these other stages of grief. It can be all and nothing and any time.
I thought it was Freud.
probably. But I do think that's interesting, that how quickly we're seeing these different patterns in our mental health, and how, official resources aren't keeping up with what we
Yeah.
see, at least what I see on a daily basis. So
Yeah.
it's upsetting a little bit, but that's all right. We're already traumatized. Oh my gosh. Can I ask another question that's not on here, but now I'm just
Sure.
like thinking. This
Go
is
on.
just actually a podcast for me. I was wondering if you've noticed there's like a certain type of perpetuator. Like, is there a certain, group of religion that's more negative to come from than another group? Is that horrible to say?
Ooh.
No, it's not. And it's kind of a nice question because it implies that not all religion is terrible, which is one of my pet peeves
Yeah.
with religious trauma folks
Mm-mm.
sometimes. So I wouldn't say that it's one particular, like every religion is going to have a set of vocabulary and a set of stories, and certainly some narratives are going to be better than others as far as
Okay.
promoting what we consider to be healthy right now.
Right.
But the bigger factor is fundamentalism versus, I would say, like there's a spectrum of fundamentalism to mysticism.
Okay.
And that on the mysticism side of things are a bit safer from really good. Yeah, like it depends on how you define things. But
Yeah.
Definitely.
speaking of fundamentalism, it's that rigid, you have to believe these fundamentals or else you will insert threatening thing here.
Okay.
And so it is all related to creating and perceived threats that then are used to control people, that get attached to morality systems
Right.
and protocols, rituals,
Okay.
that kind of thing.
Okay.
So
that makes sense.
Yeah.
And you can use whatever stories or religious vocabulary you want, and people
Yeah.
have experienced that in quote more mysticism and new age stuff, but then have also experienced it in Christianity,
Oh yeah,
in even
definitely.
Yeah.
Like
in Buddhism, and like it's all over.
forms of like progressive spirituality. I've heard some horrendous things that are just
Yeah.
it's just gaslighting at that point. And I'm like, really? That doesn't sound healthy at all. You know,
Yeah.
which is, it does create a very delicate problem, which is something that I've spoken about in our Discord. People come to me like, can you teach me things? No, I'm not a teacher. Don't look, I'm not a religious leader. I'm not a teacher. There are no rules here. This is my spiritual path, my practice that I do. I'm not telling any of you to do exactly what I'm doing, but if you want to sit and talk about it, we can talk about it. But I'm not going to, because I don't want to go anywhere down that avenue.
No.
Because
Yeah.
it's once something is done, once the ball is rolling, other people push and pull and interpret what you say and what you do, and it completely renders the whole thing null and void.
Yeah.
And we try very hard for that.
To
be
have
completely
such an open
inclusive
space.
and
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. How can we accept and heal those aspects of ourselves without losing ourselves in a new religion? Because there are religion hoppers that will go from spirituality to spirit, or different path to different path rather, and it's like, what?
Yeah. So I think the first question in trying to figure that out for me was, what need was I using this unhealthy relationship with religion to meet? And can I find a healthy way to meet that need? So what I've discovered over time, it's taken me a while to identify this, but I now know that I was a flat-footed asthmatic kid that was heavy, that had a lot of good like intellectual capacity, but also in my context felt like I was completely worthless unless I was spiritual, because I could get in contact with this non-physical world that would then enhance who I was. So I needed to come to an understanding of, this is my vulnerable spot that I met with
Mhm.
being doggedly committed to something that ended up being abusive for me.
Mhm.
I need to deal with that first.
Okay.
Um, but I think some other things, like knowing what to look for in terms of power and control dynamics, is also important. And going through, you mentioned grief earlier, going
Yeah.
through a grieving process of some
Mhm.
of the grand and epic things that
Yeah.
feel so attractive and appealing. Like, there can be euphoric experiences related to controlling religion. It's part of what makes it so controlling. Of, I had this amazing experience, now I can't question the people that have interpreted that experience for me.
Mm.
And um, so being able to say, actually,
Mhm.
it's possible there isn't some big grand plan, and
Yeah.
that while I may be special in some ways, I'm not special in the way that I crave.
Right.
Mm.
Right.
And that it's okay for life to be boring and mundane sometimes. That's actually a
Mhm.
really great environment for healing.
It's fantastic. I love it. I
Yeah.
love it. I'm a hobbit by nature. No excitement, no surprises. Thank you.
Yeah. So a lot of people go looking for that like silver bullet that's gonna, or a magic pill that's gonna be the thing
Mhm.
that just utterly transforms them. It's like, well, if you really want to be transformed, it's really slow work, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And it's about building skills and building trust in myself and paying attention to my body and knowing what's going on.
Yeah.
And that's just, it's slow and not always very exciting.
Right.
I like that. The idea that, because people do expect, I think if Hollywood has something to portray to that, any form of a
Mm,
transformation, any form of change is always portrayed as a cataclysmic event, as two
yeah.
huge bodies clashing, and there is just flack and all forms of ripples and disasters, and it isn't like that at all.
Mm-mm.
Change is very subtle. It can be incredibly slow, as you said. um there's a book I was reading, and she was talking about letting go of things. When you let go of something, people often don't let go because it seems too simple sometimes just to let go
Hmm.
of something. And she says that throwing something away, if you have something that is moldy, you throw it in the trash. It's no longer serving you. You don't hold a ritual for it. You don't scream to the heavens before letting it go. You just throw it away.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And it can be that simple when there's something of your own, in the sense of past or feelings, throwing those feelings away because they're not helping anymore. But we don't expect that. We don't, it doesn't create a marker in some form of transformation that we're looking for.
Hmm.
We want there to be thunder and lightning, and it's very dramatic, and it's just waiting for that to happen can take eternity.
Yes. Actually, can I be a trauma nerd for a second
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
riff on this a little bit? One of the things that I grew up thinking about in general in therapy is that you had to get people to have really intense reactions and cry and
Mm.
have this big moment. And I have since been studying the history of trauma treatment and discovered that there's a name for that, abreaction, and
Mm.
that it is a very violent way of treating trauma that has been used regularly in the 20th century. They call it implosion or flooding.
Mm.
And the idea is to get people, I mean, in some ways, I don't think they would use this language, but ultimately, you're getting them to retell the story and re experience the horror of it, to
Right.
put it in chronological order. And
Yeah.
technically, if you can do that, it works. But
Okay.
most people that go through that process don't actually finish because it feels terrible. And
Oh,
and what we have discovered since then is
yeah.
that if we can get our bodies to relax and then go through narratives, or even simply face our triggers in everyday life with relaxation response instead of heightened threat response, that's all
Mm.
it takes. And I have had some conversations with clients that really want something to be dramatic, and you can go dramatic. You can go do EMDR. It's helped me, but
Mhm.
at the same time, there are, for a lot of things, it can be as simple as confronting triggers consciously in a relaxed body. And when it comes to religious trauma, a lot of those triggers are everyday life things. So you're already confronting triggers all the
Mhm.
time. And so it
Yeah.
just turns into this basic practice of, oh, I'm not in danger anymore. I'm going to relax my body. And it takes
Mhm.
5 to 10 seconds if you know how to do it.
Mhm.
And again, boring, but also there is this story of, well, I
Mhm.
need to have this really intense experience and then it'll be better.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, you could, but you don't have to. It can be much gentler.
Mhm. Mhm.
Mm. Well, it reminded me of that thing with the Dr. Phil got in trouble about, because it was this constant thing of trying to get the reaction out of people and
Mm.
getting them to retell their story, getting to try and provoke to get
Oh,
this
for like
emotion
TV?
on camera
Yeah.
for people. But then afterwards, it was like, thanks very much, bye,
Bye. Yeet.
and
Ugh.
there was that,
Oh no.
but you look at it, but especially in the 90s, that was a big thing. It's not so much anymore,
Mhm.
but that was a big thing on all forms of chat shows and stuff, getting people to break down on television. And it was purely for other people's amusement because it looked as though they were making headway. Oh, this is a healing thing. This person is crying and screaming and hugging. And
Mhm.
they're not healing, just getting to relive trauma.
Yeah.
It's terrifying.
Yeah.
Mm.
Um, I think that's actually really upsetting. Trying to get someone to re-trigger themselves. I think it makes sense in certain settings, like if you're trying to figure out a trauma that had happened to you that maybe you repressed. I can't think of a scenario where re-triggering somebody and getting those big reactions would feel nice, but then that's not my process, I guess. So I was like, oh,
Yeah, but no,
sounds
it's what Emily
painful.
said. It can
Yeah,
help,
it
but
can
you have to
help.
continue and follow it through.
Right. Right.
Whereas, funnily enough, I was thinking the other day about how I see my parents now and how I saw them before,
Mm,
and now I recognize in them a lot of their downfalls, a lot of their things that are actually just fears,
yeah.
Mm.
that I never really saw because they try and hide it. That's the way that they were taught. You have to hide these fears. Don't let these fears show, especially to your children.
Right.
Mm.
And I was thinking about that, but it was a 10-minute sit and think, a bit of a daydream. And then since then, I came away looking at something, thinking, "My goodness, this is complete. These people are the reason I'm messed up." So, I'm looking at these people, thinking, "Wow, you're kind of pathetic." And now I'm thinking to myself, then why the hell am I allowing this to affect me
Yeah.
now in
Mm.
my life when these people
Mhm.
have clearly not got their shit together?
Yeah.
Yep.
You know,
We could delve so deep into
we
that,
could
but
delve.
that'd be another episode.
Yeah.
And oh my goodness. Is there, we talked about losing oneself in a new religion too. Is there something people should be wary of as they move into a new religion? Is there like a specific type of person? Is there like trigger words that you have noticed, Emily, that like you're like, that is problematic? Be careful of what
Mm.
they're saying.
Um, I might come up with more phrases or trigger words as I talk about this. Nothing's coming to
Mhm.
mind, but the
Okay.
big thing to pay attention to is somebody claiming to be an expert, and what are their qualifications?
Right.
Um, and then also like gurus or people where
Yeah.
they're the magical one and they can tell you what your value is and they're
Mm,
seeing all of the things in you and you need their input in order to progress.
yeah.
No.
Mm,
No.
Um, Really, especially when it comes to religious trauma, there's so much that's been outsourced to the religion, including critical thinking,
Mhm.
creating a sense of meaning, values. That's each individual's work to do and to build. And
Right.
it's going to be a constant process of, well, let me read another book so I can figure out how to do this. And at a certain point, you've got to put the books down and just say, okay, how do I get to know myself? What do I value? Let me think this through on my own terms for myself.
Right.
Not that books can't help, because I'm a super nerd, but also books can be my own dissociative process if I'm
Mhm.
not conscious and intentional
Right.
about how I use them.
Absolutely. I think the human experience too is just to go and ask your friends and your family, oh, like, how do you think about this? How do you feel about this? Do you believe the same things I do too? And that can be not the best way to go about it, but books also, you need that when you're going through spirituality and progressing. I think you need that sense of community. That's one of the biggest reasons people
Hmm.
turn towards religion in the
Yeah,
first
Hmm.
place. So it can be very difficult and a weird path to walk figuring that out.
definitely. What's funny is the idea of what you're saying about reading books, and there
Yeah,
comes a point where you have to just put the books down and do it.
put it down.
Is one of the things in forms of witchcraft.
Mhm.
What people do in witchcraft. They read books like, okay, so I just get it. I just don't know where to begin. That's because you're reading the experience of every other person. It is completely personal. Everything, your whole perception, your whole life from start to finish is yours. And so, therefore, what that person wrote in the book may help you as a guide, but it's not a recipe book. It's not a step by step of what you should do. And you give people that sort of freedom in a way,
Mhm.
and especially if they're not used to it and they're like, I don't want to make a mistake. And you're like, you're supposed to. That's what the point is. Make mistakes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Get in over your
Yes.
head, you know. Um, and that's a tough one, especially the idea of, especially now in forms of witchcraft, people bringing deities into witchcraft,
Mhm.
which is,
Mm.
I understand it, and but I think it's, for a lot of people, they come away from monotheistic religion, they need something, they need a figurehead there, they need something there.
Yeah.
um
That's definitely been one of the biggest trends we've noticed in the last year is a
yeah,
lot of people, moving from a monotheistic religion
into
and
more
into
pagan based.
pagan beliefs or witchcraft.
Mm.
But then they immediately are like, okay, what can I replace that God with? Another God?
Hmm.
And it would be nice to help. And I hope this episode helps people kind of sort through a lot of those feelings, because you don't have to have
That's
another God to replace your God. You can just be.
that is exactly why
Yeah.
witchcraft is blasphemous and spirituality is not. Because witchcraft is telling you that you are God. You're the
Yeah.
God.
Yeah.
You get to make and create the world you want.
Right.
And but they're like, you can't tell people that.
I think too that it's possible to bring, if people experienced their God in the monotheistic tradition they're coming from as
Right.
abusive, it's very easy to bring those dynamics into a relationship with another deity if that's
Yeah.
Mhm.
how they choose to go about things. And so it can be good to get some personal grounding first
Yeah.
Right.
and really have some standards for what a relationship with a deity is going to look like before you start doing that again. Um,
Mhm. Mhm.
my like my personal view on the whole deity interaction thing is
Mhm.
one of developing attachment, um,
Yeah.
Right.
and and from what I've seen in the very little amount of attachment literature that's
Yeah.
examining whether people can attach to figures like God,
Mhm.
is that they'll take through what they've already experienced.
Mm.
And so it's really important, I think, to find secure attachment with humans,
Mhm.
really,
Yeah.
and know what that feels like in your body and know how to be in a healthy and safe relationship before playing around with deity stuff.
Yeah.
Because
Definitely.
in many ways, people are going to have different perspectives on this for sure, but it's always going to be colored by your experience.
Yeah.
Whether the deity is out there or not, the picture you
Mhm.
paint and the story you tell is going to be colored by how you have learned to interact with such things.
Mm. Right. That's one of the things I noticed, especially when it comes to old school spiritualism. The word spirit encompasses everything. It encompasses spirit
Mm.
and a holy form of spirit. And one of the things about it is that this whole kind of relinquishing, they say give it up to God in a sense.
Mhm.
And what I notice is that something is coming. something is coming my way that I must prepare for. That, say, for instance, I've got my 2 months notice, and I need to find a new place to live.
Mm.
Some people will be like, well, spirit will provide. That's it. Spirit will provide. Yes, but perhaps you should be looking for someone. Perhaps you
Trying
should
to
be
find
saving
some
or-
place to go, right?
No, they'll provide. It's fine. And it's like, I don't understand. Like, you are living in a very physical world. You can create change yourself.
Yeah.
Why on earth would a spirit help you when you are more than capable of doing it yourself?
No.
To be honest, that's just surely that's just laziness at that point and should not be rewarded by any
Right.
help. But there you go. I found that quite funny though, how people almost use certain forms of religion, or just on a personal way, their religion. They use it as a not to try. This is scary. I don't want to try this. I could fail at this. So therefore, I will hand it over to someone who is, quote, perfect, someone who could not fail. And then if it does fail, there is a greater reason. No, but there's a greater reason.
It's not their fault.
One,
They're perfect. I forgot.
Yeah. So I will add a little bit of neuroscience that I know to this. So, and it can get complicated, because what I heard you saying, Ellen, is that like people outsource responsibility to some imaginary thing, and that's not helpful. One study that I read about involved looking at the anterior cingulate cortex, which is kind of like the threat detector of the brain, related to decision making in people that had a unattackable pure belief in God, people that did not believe in God at all, and people that were doubting. And what they discovered was the people that had this really pure belief in God had the sense of, oh, God's going to take care of everything. So they didn't get as anxious.
Yeah.
And atheists were a little bit less anxious than the people who were doubting. Were extremely anxious about making decisions. And what's practical related to all of that is that the people that do have this unwavering belief and aren't afraid then won't get put into a threat response that makes decision making harder, rational thinking harder to access, all of those kinds of things. And so in some ways they have an advantage.
Yeah.
If they can make good decisions. But if it's a complete outsourcing of, I'm not even going to think about it, this is more dissociative than it is me able to take good stock of what's going on and make a decision knowing that God's got my back or whatever.
Right.
Then not so functional.
Like those people who have the bumper stickers that says Jesus is my seatbelt. Those sort of people.
Oh God. Yeah. Those people will probably die sooner.
So that's poor decision making. That's where faith goes too far in decision making.
Just put your seatbelt on.
I've seen one of those. It's terrifying.
It's so scary.
It really is.
Oh man. Wow.
I know.
How does spirituality play into our self-worth and our overall health?
Can we define spirituality first?
Oh, no.
I mean, I can tell you what I've done to define it, but
please do.
So when I first started my coaching practice, I was coming off of pastoring, and what I really had the most professional experience in was spirituality. So that's what I focused on for a bit. And I did not realize the weeping and gnashing of teeth I was going to get from hardcore atheists that swung over from religious trauma. And for a lot of people, and it wasn't that intense, to be honest. Nobody knew who I was, but the few comments that I did get that I was reactive to at the time involved this sense of, well, spirituality is always going to be a problem because it's connected to religion. And I then proceeded to go on a quest to define spirituality without it being connected to a deity. I've been an atheist for a very long time, even while in the religion. And I still considered myself to be a spiritual person, but I had not really done the work of the defining. So I
Okay.
got onto the local library's website and went into the academic search databases for journals and
Mm-hmm.
just looked up articles about spirituality. And of
Nice.
course, all of them are going to need to have an operative definition. So I went through about 30 of them
Oh
and
man.
pulled out the definitions and tried to look for commonalities. And I found
Mm-hmm.
four main things. One is transcendence.
Mhm.
And that can be interpreted in a variety of different ways. Some people would say transcending the physical. I think you could transcend all kinds of things with spirituality.
Yeah.
Um, Another is a sense of meaning and purpose, which is, I think,
Mm-hmm.
what corporate world, when they start getting involved in spirituality, tend to go that way.
Yeah.
Like I was surprised at how many businessy corporate articles I found on spirituality. I was like, what are you doing?
Huh?
So um, a lot of them
Mm-hmm.
involved communication and relationship with the deity. Um,
Mm.
so that was there for a lot of people, and it was very monotheistic. I was a bit frustrated I was like, y'all, there's
Yeah.
more going on in this world than Christianity.
Yep.
Like,
Yep. Yep.
really? Um, and then what was the fourth one? Transcendence. Oh, connection.
Mm.
Having some kind of connecting experience with, am I at one with the world, or connecting with humans, or connecting with the
Mm-hmm.
earth, or connecting with any of these things. And I came to the conclusion of spirituality is ultimately a conversation that could
Mm-hmm.
involve, for any person, any of those four things. If I was going to say transcendence, connection
Mm-hmm.
to a deity, connection in general, and
Mm-hmm.
meaning and purpose, how that would affect health and wellness. Meaning and purpose is the biggest one.
Yeah. No, I like that because it is a very big, broad thing determining what spirituality is, because it's also a personal thing. Like
Mhm.
for some people, a lot of those things that you mentioned, like for me, one of the things is that the concept of truth in spirituality
Mm,
it almost takes on a philosophical sense of
yeah.
we are trying to understand the truth. We are trying to hold on to a universal truth to kind of start from, to go or head towards even. Um, but the thing about that is that truth is completely up to conjecture. It is changing all the time. What you know now will not be the same. What I'm trying to achieve right now is not what I am going to probably achieve tomorrow or what I will want to achieve tomorrow. It's
Yeah.
constantly the goal is always changing. You are always changing. It's complete chaos, really, but you are trying to make a sense of it in some manner.
Mhm.
And I think so many people get so frustrated and also start hurting themselves because of that. Whereas to me now, it's got to the point where I'm like, I don't know, because nothing is true in this sense. Things are,
Mhm.
but that to me is the idea of religion, and I see spirituality as a sort sit closer in a way to a science, because science, like spirituality, should and always be willing to be proven wrong
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
in that
Yeah.
way. Whereas religion adheres to what was known and still is. No. It still adheres to what this is. It is unchanging, and it must be unchanging for it to be
Mhm.
an anchorage. Whereas spirituality, like science, is like occasionally all of a sudden you're like, wow, that's not true. Okay, we will accept a new truth that has come along. We know differently now, and we will work from that
Mhm.
instead.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's. But when you when you say spirituality is as similar to science, it sounds very strange.
Yeah.
Yeah, though, okay, so I got into, also in my let me respond to the angry atheists that don't want me doing anything with spirituality
Right.
quest. I got into neuroscience, particularly regarding spirituality. So the field of neurotheology.
Hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And in my reading about that, I came across this concept that our brains, just the way that they work, they're constantly creating myths or
Mm-hmm.
stories, narratives about the data that they're taking in.
Mm.
Like it, I can't look at this mug and say it's a mug without creating a story about it first.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
so my brain is taking in the look of this, the feel of it, whatever, and then deciding, oh, the story of this is that it is a mug and I use it for my tea and I drink out of it. But it
Mm.
could be a completely different story with the same data
Yeah.
somewhere else. And so we create those kinds of stories about all kinds of things. Science is about creating those stories with a variety of different data that we experience.
Yeah.
Spirituality is the same process, I think, but about something much more nebulous, which is, what are we doing here?
Mm.
Um,
Yeah.
and what does it mean for me to be here? Which is very, very different than, what is this table made out of? Oh, and also I called it a table, so I already was doing some interpretation
Yeah.
there. But
Yeah.
Right.
And so I do think in many ways that they are similar.
Mm. I like, because I've said that a couple of times about purpose. People ask me, what is my purpose? And I'm like, I can't tell you that. What your purpose is. I can tell you one thing, that you don't need one. And I often use things like this mug. This mug has a purpose. It is a mug vessel. It's
Yeah.
been given a purpose, that it fulfills that purpose. It does not leak. You as a human do not have a purpose. You do not need a purpose in order to have a life that you enjoy, that is fulfilled. But it takes me back to that, giving something a myth is when you apply animism to things. People apply animism to things, and they will always come down to natural things as well, things like trees, rocks, rivers. And I remember when I was a teenager thinking, I think it was my mother who said, like, yes, but that's not natural. And I said, but it is natural.
Yeah.
She's like, no, but like medicines and plastics and things. I said, yeah, but they don't come from space. We don't just create them. Like they come from plants and chemicals, all compounds that come from the planet that we live on.
Yeah.
So it is natural. It is still something of this existence, of our planet. And she was like, no, it's not natural. And I was like, that doesn't make sense. Like either everything has spirit or none of it does. You can't just decide that it doesn't have spirit because I've altered it. It was something that I think about when it comes to animism in that sense, because a lot of people, they place things that have spirit, but as long as there is a natural form of beauty to it, and it is or what they consider to be untempered with, which alone always drives me mad, to be honest, because it's like picking children.
Yeah, it's almost like that says more about what a person is willing to be in relationship with, than it is the thing itself.
Yeah. It's very. I love it. It's a great subject as well. Just looking at how people interact with the world around them, and like you said, that what they give meaning to and how it comes to be.
Absolutely.
Like when you said, when you held up the mug, immediately the first thing I thought was earth, just clay. But I think that's what we do. We look at a table and think wood. It's table, wood, tree. That's what I do anyway. In my very caveman brain, I'm like, wood, table. Just keep it simple.
What?
Yeah. Do you not do that?
No.
Oh, all right.
My brain's not that deep, guys. I'm sorry. I see a table. I'm like, table.
You don't look at your iPhone and think copper, silica.
No.
Rubber.
To be honest, I don't either.
Do you not? I do. When I look at things like that, and I think I always think about what things are made of. Like, and I don't know why. It's a thing that
I think that's a neurodivergent thing.
It probably is, to be honest. Yeah. All right, fair enough.
When I see a table, I think dinner.
Yes.
I think humans sitting around it, which is also its own storytelling too.
There you go. Yeah.
Oh.
If you feel comfortable, I would like to ask kind of how your journey has evolved and something you'd want to share with others that you've learned on that path.
Well, I'm comfortable. I'm trying to decide how to answer them.
What should I share?
Yeah. Well, I will say my initial brush with religious trauma and even just religious harm occurred in my awareness when I was 17. At the time, I think in some ways I was lucky because I had a really awful conversation with my pastor that was very theological, gaslighting, and terrible and abusive. And I was able to look back and say, it was that was the thing that caused me all of this pain now. And as I have since been working through things, I now realize, no, it wasn't just one experience. It was a whole collection of things. It was an entire community living by this code that it was mixed. there were some really good positive things in it, and then it got twisted too.
Yeah.
And so my initial response to that was to be very black and white about things and say, this is bad, this is good, this is dangerous, this is not. And that's a threat response thing. We go into binary thinking when we are jacked up.
Yeah.
And that ended up not really working well as far as being able to truly connect with other people, which is ultimately what helps us heal. When we're able to connect with people worth trusting,
Right.
people that do good by us, that begins the healing process and gives us the foundation to
Yeah.
continue our own work with ourselves. So I guess the thing I would say is, it's very easy to want to be all about research, all about isolating from the things that seem threatening. And what's going to be most helpful, if a person has truly gotten out,
Yeah.
if a person has truly left and is in a safe place, because, if you're still in danger, then optimize for survival. But if you've come out, um, paying attention to safety and giving the body an opportunity to relax back into that,
Right.
and starting from that as a foundation of then connecting,
Okay.
is key and
Yeah.
simple and boring and terrifying all at the same time.
For
um,
real.
and doesn't seem as magical, but when it
Yeah.
comes down to it, is a pretty cool thing.
Oh yeah.
Definitely.
Awesome. Excellent.
I'm happy you mentioned if you're not in a safe space, because I think I've geared this towards you are in a safe space now, this podcast episode, and I think it's good
You
to.
talking to me?
No, just in
You
general.
look at
What
me, I'm
Emily
like,
said, I just
I'm
think
like-
it's a good thing to remind you if
Yeah.
you do what you can to survive, and you just need to survive as long as you can until you are okay to start healing. And you do you, boo. Like you got figured out and move forward when you're ready to too.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
So what do you want to promote, and where can people learn more about you, Emily?
Well, I have a website, Emily Hedrick Coaching and Consulting.com. And my fun thing that I have available for people right now, I just finished it a few weeks ago, is the Religious Trauma Recovery Starter Kit. And basically, I put together all of the things I wish I had available quickly to me when I first started trying to understand religious trauma and trying to understand myself. So there's a few things in there. There's a research vocab list, because sometimes just having the right words and knowing how to label things can be very helpful. And in the midst of that, also like some terms that might actually translate well to your therapist if you need it.
Right.
And then there's a list of books depending on certain things you're working with.
Okay.
And then I also have some acute relaxation practices in there to start that process of saying, am I safe? Can I welcome my body into safety? Here's what I can do to relax into that in 5 to 10 seconds in everyday life without having it to be some big, huge thing.
Nice.
So that is available. You can find it on my Instagram links, and on my website, it's around. So.
Awesome.
Excellent.
We'll also share those in the notes too, the podcast notes. So.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Well,
and then I guess I
you.
should probably also say that I do one-on-one coaching and group coaching for religious trauma recovery. I teach skills. And I'm a coach, not a therapist, so I'm not going back into memories with people as much as working in the present and saying what skills can we learn to technically it's to optimize for our lives. It's not necessarily trauma resolution is an exciting perk. And then there's also, psychoeducational aspects to that, and being able to understand and apply vocabulary to what happened to me related to religious trauma. So
awesome.
that's, you can find all about that on website, Instagram.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us
ever so
today.
much.
Yeah, it was a pleasure. Great talking with you.
You can find us on TikTok, Instagram, and Facebook as The Antlered Crown, or on YouTube as Elwyn the Witch.
I offer a variety of readings, including bone readings, tarot readings, medium connection, as well as spiritual consultations, which are done live and scheduled via Zoom. I am also offering spell work and custom merchandise, of all which you can find on my website, theantleredcrown.com.
Next time, we will be talking to ourselves about divination.
Would you like to do that bit again?
And all of its variations. No, I won't.
One of the pillars of magic, divination.
Yeah, that one. And always remember.
Tip your witch, bitch.
Bye.
Bye.